Today, we're talking to Varun Badhwar, CEO of Endor Labs, about how they're solving the developer productivity tax by making code more secure. You're listening to Joel Beasley, Modern CTO.
So I like to start at the beginning with what you're doing with Endor. Can you tell me why you decided to create this company?
Back in 2021, I was running an engineering team of about 450 people, building one of the fastest growing SaaS platforms for cybersecurity. And there's this little known incident called SolarWinds that happened in that summer where many of us, thousands of companies, in fact, that were using it, got affected by the software supply chain incident. That kind of triggered our board of directors to ask lots of questions around, well, what are we doing about software supply chain security and, kind of doing a threat model of everything that could possibly go wrong. And in that process, kind of the biggest realization for me was, software development is a bit of a fallacy. We're really software assemblers. 90%, 80%, 90% of the code comes from open source. Our developers are rapidly putting it together, writing all of the integrations around it. But reality is most of this code is unvetted. It's complete strangers on the internet, hobbyists, some good companies behind it. Some are unknown unknowns. You don't know where they live, what they do for a living, what their motivations shipping software are. And nobody's really paying attention to those details. And when I kind of looked at what our kind of teams were doing to scan some of that software, we were using a popular tool at the time that I won't name for software composition analysis. That was spitting out 68,000 alerts in the backlog of our developers, and nobody ever did anything with it. And so, as I dug in deeper, it turns out 8 out of 10 things that are reported by these code scanning tools for security vulnerabilities are actually wrong. After developers spend several hours kind of going through that process, that's what it turns out to be. And it's kind of an odd situation because it essentially means that we're holding developers guilty until they can come back and prove their innocence to their security counterparts. And that is essentially what causes all of the friction in cybersecurity. That is what I call the developer productivity tax. And essentially, that tax was too high, in my opinion. And we weren't really addressing any of the risks associated with the software, the true risks, because we could never figure out what was real, what was hypothetical, what was a false positive. And therein kind of was just the aha moment to say, there's got to be a better way to solve it. And lo and behold, actually, today is literally a 4-year anniversary of the company. We set out to hire the smartest people on the planet to go crack the code on how we're going to solve it.
That is amazing. I remember that SolarWinds incident. That was a topic on the show. Everyone was talking about it for quite a while. So you started this company. No other products were able to solve what you needed in the way that you needed. So what's different about your approach to the other ones? Why go build it? Why not use something else?
Yeah, so as 80, 90% of our code is now open source, the way, obviously the audience here is very familiar, we all work with this, is we bring in all of these libraries from open source. Those dependencies bring in more transitive dependencies, on average, 77 transitive dependencies with each direct dependency. And you have just this massive, complex code graph that comes in. But the biggest realization is 88% of lines of code in your repositories go unused because developers bring these large libraries, they use a method or a function here or there. Everything else is just dormant, yet sitting in your code base. And all of these code scanning tools in the market had the same exact technical approach. They scan the manifest of your application. In the manifest, the developers have declared certain libraries that they're bringing in. Any and all vulnerabilities in those versions of libraries that are declared in the manifest are assumed to be affecting you. They kind of call it a day. All of this goes into a backlog of developers. And so why is this so broken? One, you really need to look at the source code as the ground truth, not the manifest. And you really need to understand what code is actually being used in the context of your application. And if I could crack that first problem, I would already be able to kind of safely filter out the vulnerabilities being reported in 88% of the code that's dormant, not even called in your application. So that's kind of problem number one. Problem number two was, how do I do this analysis fast enough where I could do it as the developers are writing the code, not running the scan 8, 12, 24 hours later when they moved on to other things? And problem number three was, don't leave people at the altar with a list of problems and no proposed solutions. There's a reason in engineering we have this term called dependency hell, because it's freaking complicated to figure out how you're going to go upgrade complex foundational libraries in your application. We could take weeks, months, years sometimes to do it. And when security teams are just reporting, go fix this, go up this library version, that, here, there, nobody can actually appreciate if it's going to work or not. So our goal was, we've got to give you the answer on how you're going to fix it with the confidence that this will actually work in the context of your application, not just hypotheticals of just go bump to the latest version, because latest isn't always the best for your application. So to answer your question, how do we go about fixing it? Why hadn't anybody cracked the code in the industry before? So my co-founder, CTO, and I went out and we hired the best in the business in program analysis across the world. We ended up with 13 PhDs, world-renowned experts, all the way from Brazil to Netherlands, France, US, India. And the whole goal was, if we get the smartest people in the room, we put enough resources and compute and funding to hire the best people, we will go figure out how to crack this code. And there was a lot of this work being done internally at places like Meta and GitHub and Microsoft for internal developer productivity. And we harnessed the best of that knowledge, a lot of work that has been done in academia and research. And we built this mechanism called how to build a call graph of your application, and where essentially we can trace with static analysis every path from your first party code into every dependency, not just what libraries are being called, but what methods, what lines of code are being used in those libraries. And how do you do it at scale? Because theoretically in a lab, you could do that, but it would take 24, 48, 72 hours. We had to do this within 1, 2, 3 minutes. And so we built a new technology called stitching, where we could pre-compute a bunch of these call graphs. And then when we came into our client organization, our customers, say it's Robinhood or OpenAI or Snowflake, we could rapidly connect their first-party code and our call graphs that are pre-computed for open source and get the full visibility of their application. So that was the first problem we had to solve. The second problem was all of the vulnerability databases that exist in the public ethos, all they do is earmark which library was affected. You don't know what lines of code were affected. You don't know what lines of code fixed it. And so even if I had this beautiful call graph of your code, knowing what methods they use, what methods are not, I now had to overlay the vulnerability data set on that. And essentially we took a Herculean effort on to go back to the past decade, look at every CV and build systems plus human engineering to go figure out how we could annotate every vulnerability down to the line of code that affected it and the lines of code that were actually implemented to go fix that security problem. And so we've just over the years built this tremendous knowledge graph that, I'll pause here, but as we fast forward to talking about AI and AI coding assistants, is just remarkably valuable data.
You used an acronym. Whenever anyone uses an acronym on the show, we ask them what it is. What's CVE?
Common vulnerabilities and exposures. It's the industry standard in how we communicate across vendors, across researchers, what a vulnerability is. So every time somebody finds a problem in any piece of software, there's a process, there are certain organizations that you go report it to. They give it a distinct CVE ID. It goes through a full triage process to the reported vendor. Then they decide how to fix it, or if it's open source. It's a report. It's like the social security number for vulnerabilities in software.
Awesome. In your LinkedIn bio, it says that there's huge amounts of malicious code in circulation. What's happening there?
If you think about the world, the attackers, the hackers, like their goal is to find the easiest entry point to have the maximum impact in whatever they do, right? And with how much reliance the industry has on open source software, like there are packages out there on NPM that have 500 million downloads each year, right? And literally if the internet operates on some little library that is written by some stranger who lives in Russia, that nobody knows what their day job is, what they do, what motivates them, how they earn money, but that is the core of the software that we rely on the internet. And essentially what we have started finding more and more cases of is malicious code infiltrating into the open source ecosystem on NPM, on PyPy and others, because what people are saying is, look, this is a Wild Wild West. Developers go in, they look for utility, they find something, they grab it, they start using it. And so we have started seeing really, really popular open source projects get compromised. How does that happen? Well, maintainers not paying attention, they get a social engineering attack, they get a phishing email, they give their compromise, they give their credentials. That spirals into all of a sudden you have a new version of a library that has 100 million downloads that has malware. And most of the developers don't pin their dependencies. And so there's an auto upgrade cycle that keeps happening. It grabs the latest version, comes on the developer's laptop, you're popped. Your credentials, your secrets, everything's out of the gate. And so I think it's an emerging attack vector that software engineering teams really need to understand, which is, how do I trust this open source ethos that verify everything I'm getting? Like, we have all been missing the verify layer. We just grab stuff off the internet. And I think the times are different. You can't do that. And so a big part of Endor Labs' value prop, for example, is we're constantly scanning every package version that's released on the internet, looking for 150 points of potential risk. Could be code quality issues, could be, hey, the maintainer changed, is that suspicious or not? A new release version, let's look at the code. It didn't have pre-installed scripts, now it does. What are these scripts trying to do? Are they exfiltrating your credentials and such? And so just for your audience to be aware that, using open source without guardrails is a bit dangerous. Harness the power of open source, but make sure you have controls in place that are kind of scanning all this software and giving you some confirmed data on, can this be trusted?
And so in an ideal world, my background software engineering, ideal world, I run your tool. It tells me where the problem or the vulnerability, and then there's just a button, and I just click the button. Are you guys doing any of that automatically? Is there any of these situations that are so common that your machines can learn from them, and then it's just a one-click implementation?
Yeah. So again, speaking of the state of art that existed 4 years ago, and what have we done? 4 years ago, what people would do is say, well, great, I see Jackson Data Buying, version 131 has a CVE. Great. The remediation is upgrade to latest. Now, nobody could ever tell you if it was the latest had any breaking changes, any backwards compatibility issues, version conflicts. Was it going to work in your code? So if you kind of recall, when engineers talk about dependency hell and you Google it and look at all the posts around it, it's about, oh shit, I tried to upgrade. It broke my app. Then I went back. Then I tried another version. Then I went back. And it just is a complicated problem. And the reason it's a complicated problem is all of this open source software, they don't guarantee any backwards compatibility. They don't have to. It's open source. Use it at your own risk for the most part. And as a developer, somebody might have introduced this library 7 years ago. I'm not the guy who brought it in, and I've got to go fix it. So I lack context on my application. I lack context on if the upgrade is going to work or not. And so part of that cracking of the code that Endor did, the secret sauce, is now that I have a call graph of your application, I actually know with my machine intelligence how you're using this library, what lines of code are you invoking, where you might have version conflicts and such. So I have knowledge about your application. I am also tracking similar knowledge and insight about every version to version change in the open source. And so when I'm about to tell you, a developer, that listen, you have a vulnerability and you've got to fix it with this upgrade path, I can simulate in the context of your application and say, if I took your existing call graph and I replaced it with this new version's call graph, would it actually cause any problems in your application? Would there be any breaking changes? Were any methods and functions replaced? And so with the intelligence that Endor has developed, we actually can now give you an easy button, not just with a pull request that is created with the action you need to take, but also with the confidence that when you actually approve that PR, it's going to work and not tear up your application.
That's wild. That's what's the key way you sell this into companies? Is it time savings? Because to me, as a business person and an engineer, it's like, great, I want my stuff to be secure. Security is a big one, but just the time savings of implementing it.
Yeah. Look, we call this everything in security. And there's the reality is there's been lots of debates in the world of do developers care about security? Do they not care about security? Security attacks. I call all of it a developer productivity tax. Security, for the most part, is a developer productivity task. We are trying to move fast, ship applications. We keep getting these reports of things that are going wrong. Our OKRs typically measure us for development velocity and what we ship. Security has separate OKRs. They conflict. So What is a developer productivity tax? It is all the time you have to spend mostly proving your innocence to the security teams, because as I told you, 80-90% of the things security teams often report to developers are false positives, yet you have to prove your innocence. All the manual triage, investigation, code review to go give the evidence to say, no, like get this off my plate, I'm not going to fix it. Huge tax. The second thing is when I found a legitimate problem out of like the diamond in the rough, and I'm actually performing these upgrades, they're very time consuming. And I don't know with certainty how to even estimate to a product team or security team how long it might take me. Maybe I'll be done in an hour. Maybe it will take me 6 weeks. So Endor's value, when we go in and deploy a product, or typically we replace an existing product, or we augment a product like Dependabot that's just natively available in GitHub, there's really kind of a couple key metrics we track for our customers. One, how much of your backlog of reported issues did we just eliminate that you never even have to think about? And companies like Robinhood have given us public testimonials that we have typically eliminated 95% of the backlog of theoretical vulnerabilities that are not even real. So imagine for a moment, 95% of your backlog of security work just goes away, out of the window. So we measure how much time that saves you. The second thing we measure is how much faster with our insights are you able to upgrade your libraries and fix your code and refactor your code. And we're measuring that at about 400% increase in how fast you can remediate. And I'll tell you something, the reason this has become more important today than ever is the adversaries typically would take 6-9 months to develop exploits for these vulnerabilities that were available. Today with AI, spending $2.77 on these models, they can generate an exploit within minutes. So the time you had to go kind of secure your application has gone from you probably had months to go figure this out to now you have days to actually defend yourself.
That's pretty interesting. So 400% increase in remediation speed. You're measuring the time of them not chasing vulnerability issues with code that's not called. And how do people buy this? Let's do a quick call to action for Endor. Do you charge by seat? Do they reach out to get a demo? How does that work?
Yeah, go check out endorlabs.com. There's actually a product walkthrough. You can actually interact and see how that works. And also I encourage everybody to go look at endorlabs.com/customers and just the incredible stories from Dropbox and Peloton, Robinhood, Five9, Cursor, and just incredible companies that are building the future of software of our time and how they actually value, what Endor Labs offers them.
That is brilliant. Those are some big customers.
We certainly have some amazing customers, and we're very proud of that. Speaking of developer productivity, a great segue could be starting to talk about like the emergence of AI coding agents, because I think that ties right into the developer productivity.
That is perfect, because that was exactly where my mind was going, because there's a couple parts of the conversation. There's all the existing code, library, and dependencies, but then there's also like what I'm doing right now with coding agents.
Yeah.
So what do you do there?
So now we've been talking about developer productivity. And if you look at any company on the planet, like everything that they're boasting about today is how AI is going to drive developer productivity up. Behind all of that are these AI coding agents. And let's kind of go back behind the scenes. How are these AI coding agents trained to write software? They're trained on all of the code on the internet, open source code. And so it's great, but it's also scary because they have learned the good practices, the high quality code patterns, but they have also learned all the different poor development patterns, non-scalable ways to write code, insecure ways to kind of produce software. And statistically, there's a great academic research out there that looked at GitHub Copilot and a few of these agents and said between 50 to 62% of the code generated by these AI coding agents is actually insecure by default. Now, one question can be, well, is that better or worse than human-generated code? I don't know I haven't seen much studies on what human-generated code is, but like hypothetically, it feels like a bigger number. It's also scarier because the velocity at which coding agents produce code and also the verbosity, they just write a lot of lines of code. And so who is now going to be responsible for actually addressing all of their sins from a security perspective or a tech debt perspective. Another question before that, before we get into how we solve that is, well, why can't they get it right? Well, Joel, they can't get it right because ultimately they do not have labeled information to unlearn the bad practices that they picked up from all their training data. Like there's no one out there selling label information to say, well, this code you learned on GitHub is secure, this other one avoid, and don't do that, right? And so they're just replicating the patterns of what they're trained on, and they're producing a lot more code for the organizations, and a lot of it is insecure. Now, there are two ways to solve it. The old way you would do this is you would basically let it ship the code, you would let it go into a pull request, then some security scanners would kick in, identify some problems, and guess what? Put it into the backlog of the humans to go fix. We think the best way is actually to have a security pair programmer integrated into Cursor, into Copilot, into Augment, pick your favorite coding agent and ID interaction. And essentially what Endor does is it is observing the interaction between the human and the coding agent. It is seeing the output of the coding agent. It is giving real-time feedback back to the coding agent to say, listen, you're making some mistakes here in terms of security. Here are the problems. And by the way, remember we just talked about remediation? Because we have all this unique insight of the code and how to fix it, we give it, and the AI agent is very effective without burning a lot of tokens to actually rewrite the code securely with our feedback. And so we think this kind of moves to a secure by default strategy where having security oversight baked into your coding agent, overseeing AI, essentially now you're playing AI with AI, right? There's an AI agent purpose-built for writing code. Our AI agents are purpose-built for securing code and reviewing that code. And they work in cohesion to actually make sure the outputs are secure by default.
Are you guys publicly traded?
Not yet. We will be someday.
Okay. Let me know. I feel like this is the future. Like so many people are going to pile onto this because it just makes sense. It's not a hard to calculate ROI. It's not like this amorphous, well, just do it and it'll get better. It's like a very specific thing. And is it just one product or service like this, or is it a whole suite?
Yeah.
You have different products.
Yeah. We have a suite of capabilities you can license in aggregate as the entire platform, or you can start with a certain set of components. Maybe you just want to start with scanning of the open source software and doing the remediation around that. But also, you may want to extend that to doing kind of agentic security code reviews of your code. So we allow the customers the flexibility of how they want to license these components all together, or start in one of these places. And essentially, though, our goal and objective as a company is to help customers ship secure code as quickly as they can and eliminate that developer productivity tax that I keep coming back to out of the equation. Because today, it's a trade-off. I either ship fast or I ship secure. And we think you should be able to ship fast and secure by having the right tools and frameworks in place in your SDLC that are just very natively built into the platform. And one of the core beliefs we have is engineers, the developers, should never even have to see Endor or go to an Endor UI or get out of their workflow. We come and meet the developers where they are in their pull request workflows, in their coding agents, wherever they live.
I love that because it's so frustrating getting a new UI, a new thing to do.
Yeah. I'll give you a good story here. Atlassian, obviously, I think all developers use some parts of Atlassian somewhere in their life, whether you love it or hate it. We obviously love them as a partner. But Atlassian rolled out Endor across 9,000 developers and 28,000 plus code repositories in 3 weeks. And that's just how we can scale and ramp this up across the enterprise.
Okay, but in all fairness, Atlassian has some of the greatest people on the planet working there. I've done some interviews with them. No kidding, Varun. Every person I've talked to, I think it's 4 or 5 different leaders at Atlassian over the years of doing this show, was just like mind blowing. I remember them by name. So
they're incredible people over there for sure. And the engineering practices are great. But look, we've done it there. We do it for small startups that are going to be the future of enterprise software builders. And then we have some of the 40, 50-year-old code bases that are running Java 7, Java 8, C, C++ without package managers. and we support them as well. So, the way we've designed our platform and architecture, I just want to be clear, is, we call it from 40-year-old CC++ code to modern monorepos and Bazel architectures. We kind of cover the gamut.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because at first I was just kind of thinking of things, active projects that are like newer projects, more modern stuff, but you can go all the way back to 40-year-old C++.
We do. And we have the best technology there because, if you think about it with CC++, the foundational problem is there's no real package manager adoption around CC++. With JavaScript, you have NPM, you got Maven with Java, you got VC package, but like 90% of the world writing CC++ code has no package manager. So how do people use all the code? They just copy paste stuff. Like without packages, without package managers, how do I even identify that? And there's been really old kludgy ways of doing that, which are built on just matching hashes of like, hey, if this is a code component that is similar to this because it matches a hash, then great, I'll flag it. But if the developer slightly even modifies a variable name or adds a comment in that code, I can't even identify an attribute like where did this code originate from? And we've solved that 40-year-old problem with a brand new approach using LLMs and embeddings to actually build embeddings of all of that CC++ code on the internet. And now instead of relying on hashes, we can actually match the code even if the developers modified it and attribute it to the origins of where it came from. And so that's a huge problem that customers have had from a legal perspective. Think about, embedded systems being shipped, not knowing what components of software it relies on. We've solved that problem, taken a modern approach to solving a 40-year-old problem.
That's pretty cool. That's actually really interesting. Now, whenever I do these types of episodes, I always get questions people will ask after them about like, oh, do you do this in healthcare, or can you do this with banks offline? Do you have like on-prem type solutions? Do you have all that?
Yeah, look, our customers span from 100-year-old insurers, largest financials on the planet, to the most modern companies. We have a very flexible architecture of how we scan your code, where we scan your code. If you're a modern enterprise, you just want to plug in a GitHub app or a GitHub action and let us go crawl and run across all your repos. Great, we could do that. If you are much more sensitive to where your code is and where it lives, we can scan in your CI/CD pipelines as a step in your build process. All of this is very extensible, very flexible, and can be handled across the board. So.
Now, I'm curious to know, when you're going in and talking with these companies, do they already have a good idea of how much time they're spending on the security debt? Is it already a pain point, or is it something you're educating them on?
We're educating that there's a better way. I think everybody is frustrated and given up. I feel like in most organizations, if you were to run a poll with your development teams of like, rate your relationship with security 1 to 10, it's pretty adversarial. And it's pretty adversarial because security teams feel like developers ignore what they send their way. Development teams feel like security doesn't understand how code is written. And the larger the enterprise, the longer the backlog. Like we have measured this at large banks. The backlog is like 5 million security issues to be fixed in your code base. You're probably not going to get to 5 million things to fix in the next 10 years, even if you invested that time. We've talked to some large insurers where they benchmark how much time developers spend on security problems. Upwards of 50% of developers' throughput is just trying to fix all these tech debt, security debt kind of stuff. And so while your CEOs are coming to you and saying, well, we need coding assistance, we need to drive productivity up, sometimes you just got to look at the basics and say, well, if the ask is to improve developer productivity, let me remove the bottlenecks that actually prevent them from building features and shipping software. And security tends to be a very big component of that. And, the people have easier time measuring how many problems are being reported to them because they have some existing tool. Like you might be using Dependabot. And, we have a customer that did a talk at GitHub Universe that said, Endor came in and eliminated 1 million Dependabot alerts from their backlog with our analysis. And so easily quantifiable, what your Dependabot backlog is showing, how many alerts. Endor comes in, runs our analysis in our way, completely changes the narrative. That number is more measurable. The fuzzier number that most customers have a harder time to measure is how long is it taking their development team to actually fix every security vulnerability that's being reported to them. That metric is a little fuzzy.
Earlier, when you were talking about the OKRs of security versus the OKRs of developers being sort of like at odds, has anyone found a good solution to that? Or is that just part of the problem? It's just like how things are.
Yeah, I think people are trying to solve that problem in about 20% of our customer base. Product security as a function reports not into the CISO, but to the CTO. So traditionally, if you put them under different leaders, you've got conflicting priorities. In kind of companies that are figuring out that this isn't working, the product security, software security function is moving to the engineering platform CTO function. So then at least you have a single throat to choke to say, well, the CTO organization is responsible for the security of this software as well. So we're starting to see that evolution. I actually encourage in most of our customer engagements that if the security team is not bringing a representative from engineering into the evaluation process, I actually consider that a bit of a flag. And I usually encourage our customers that I talk to the security side to say, please bring your counterparts from engineering, because great, you can go select a product, but if they don't understand and appreciate the value they're getting, because as I told you earlier, we're not just kind of addressing the security problem, we're addressing the developer productivity problem. Like upgrading software and libraries is a developer problem. And so the more you can bring those people on, the more value that people find in our product. And we kind of try to break those adversarial boundaries to try to bring more cohesion into a function. But as an industry, I think there's still a long way to go. And the thing I always encourage board members and CEOs when I talked about this problem is, look, the CISO's OKR in security should not just be how many problems did they find and report, but how do they enable the business to do what the business needs to do. So how should revenue and revenue generation should be a part of the security leadership's OKR? And security should be a key part of the CTO organization's OKR. That's the only way this will work.
A lot of board members now are pushing the CEOs to get some sort of ROI with AI, right? It's happening in a lot of different companies. This sounds like it would fit into that plan. Like if I'm a CTO and I implement Endor Labs, I can come back to my C-suite peers and say, hey, we actually leveraged AI to, reduce our backlog of CVEs.
Yeah, there's two parts to this, right? You've got your legacy code base that's not going away, and then you're writing new software. And the legacy code base, right, the best way to measure this is how much of our backlog did Endor just rapidly eliminate? So these are things we don't even need to get distracted about. And usually the older the software, the lesser interest development teams have to touch it because it's fickle. Like they don't know what's going to break if they, it's a house of cards. For the modern software, it's really more about how am I creating the paved roads as my developers are rapidly going to start writing software. And by the way, we haven't even touched about vibe coders and citizen developers, but in companies now your worry is not just the trained software engineers, but other departments, other functions that are going to be contributing to your code base. How do I create the paved roads? Because if I don't create the paved roads and I have security embedded into my AI-powered software development lifecycle, if I had a backlog of 3 million security problems in the last 3 years, the next 3 years, my backlog will be 9 million because of the increase in code generation. And so, yes, I think the metrics and the way CTO should really kind of consider where Endor Labs fits is going to help me run my business, my legacy code, and help me as I'm changing my business and changing my SDLC to just put in the paved roads so I never have this kind of security debt problem to look at again in the future.
Now, I've heard of vibe coders, but what are citizen developers?
A more polite way of saying vibe coders.
Okay. That's what we're doing now. We're just like, we'll soften it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's the more enterprise kind of terminology to use is like, hey, inside of a company, they're more citizen developers. My wife coding or my kids coding, that's more vibe coding. But, inside of an organization, you see more. But look, it's a real problem, right? Even in my company at Endor, marketing's now checking in some code. Sales and SCs are checking in some code. Customer success teams, support teams are producing things. And so it's great, right? We want to harness the ability for English to be the most popular programming language of the future. We want to harness that. but we want to provide the paved roads because the thing we have seen is with AI, especially coding agents, it's not just the problem of the known security vulnerabilities, the things we said that have a CVID and a social. It's about business logic things. It ends up doing silly things. So, for example, if you don't prompt it, it's a fascinating experiment. I encourage everybody to do it. Prompt a coding agent, your favorite coding agent, to write something in AI for you, right? Build a web server, HTTP request to authenticate something. Same prompt, same logic. Now ask it to build it with a secure prompt. So ask the AI coding agent to make sure it follows all of the security practices, make sure it has proper authentication authorization, and look at the difference of the outputs. In one case, it'll give you what you said with little to no security controls, or basics even, like not even basic session validation might be missing, basic business logic might be missing. If you ask it correctly, then it'll do things a little bit better. So my macro point there is if you're a company with 20,000 developers, you cannot expect that every one of those 20,000 developers will know exactly how to prompt it to write secure software. And so what you need again is guardrails to make sure that that business logic is covered properly and you don't have silly things in your code base that is just amateurish. But the problem is humans don't have enough time to code review all of this AI generated software manually. So you are going to need automation and AI to kind of do that. And you're going to need trained specialists that are security specialists to do that. And again, that's part and parcel of how are you going to go embrace vibe coding is putting the right paved roads in place to automate a lot of the review and diligence process.
It's interesting. Yeah. And it's not all or nothing either with the labels of the vibe coding and whatnot. Because I've noticed myself, like I've got a fairly basic website that I have that I use through Lovable just because I wanted to experiment with Lovable. And so that's one experience. And then sometimes I'll use, I've got Cursor.
Yeah.
And so I'm working on maybe some legacy applications, improving those or adding some features. And so I kind of skip around and use different things for different reasons. And so it's like sometimes over here, it's like, I feel like Lovable is like pure vibe coding.
Yeah, it's a web app development. Yeah, it's building websites, right? It's not building core backend kind of software.
Yeah, and I found it's really bad for that. Like it's not good for it. I'll use as little words as possible. It's just not good for it. But when you open up Cursor and you can actually it can help you write the function. You're like, all right, I need a function that does this, and then I need a test for it. And like, you can just go function by function. It's just generating one thing at a time. And that seems to be pretty reliable. If I'm wrong, send me a message.
No, I think, look, my 2 cents on this is Cursor supercharges developers. Lovable takes people that have never written a line of code and helps them become developers, vibe coders.
That is absolutely right. And did you see the new trend with vibe marketers now? They've kind of adopted that. Yeah.
There's a vibe everything. We have a lot of jokes around vibe internal to Endor that I won't know when the kimono of. But look, it's a fascinating thing. I study the data and academic research a ton around vibe coding. And look, a lot of this will get better. It's like, when you had horse carriages, you don't have the infrastructure for cars, and then you had to build all the infrastructure and traffic lights and all the controls and rules and regulations for cars. You're going to need that for AI writing software, right? You're going to need paved roads. I keep coming back. You're going to have to put all the controls that are just automated, because today, if you talk to most trained developers, the feedback you'll get is they've gone from 80% of their time writing code, 20% reviewing code, to 20% writing code, 80% reviewing code, because that code that comes out still needs several iterations to get it production ready, right? If you're building serious enterprise software. There's a lot of promise. It takes a lot of the grunt work away, writing test cases, auto-completing code, lots of benefit. But again, you can't let it lose autonomously necessarily and expect it to have a production-grade application that is secure, scalable, and all of that. And so, look, that'll change rapidly. I couldn't tell you in 6 months, maybe it'll start doing that. Maybe it'll take 5 years. But I think our belief fundamentally at Endor is most companies, by the way, will also keep switching in and out of these tools, because like one day Cursor is hot, the other day Copilot's hot, the third day Windsurf's the best tool on the planet, and these things will keep changing. And so as a company that's worried about putting the paved roads, you almost need an independent layer of security and quality and other controls where your developers can bring in whichever tool of their choice for writing software, but your harness for testing, verification, security is just consistent across these.
That's a good point. Josh, we need to clip that point. That's a really strong point. I do want to talk about some leadership insights though, because you are a founder. So I like to ask this question. It's got some guardrails on it. So I want to know the best leadership advice that you've ever received, but then it's like you received it, you've implemented it, it worked, and you've kept it for a long period of time.
Look, the best leadership advice that the best practical leadership advice, let's talk about that, I have received is specifically around building the right culture, especially as you think about hiring engineers in a startup. Like, let's think about it, right? You're two guys in a garage trying to build a company. People are coming to you, leaving big stakes on the table, leaving nice comp packages, especially if you're trying to go for the best talent. Why do they come for you? And I think for me, the biggest learning over the years, and I made mistakes, but I think I've learned and corrected those, is uber transparency. If you think about incidents that have happened of late where, part of Windsurf got acquired and small handful of founders and people made money, most of the engineers were left on the street. There's more skepticism of what is the upside of startups. And I believe the way you address that is just transparency in how you engage prospective candidates, engineers, employees. And so one of the things we do at Endor that is different, surprisingly, I don't know why it's different, is even when we're kind of having offer negotiations and conversations, we're very transparent about our cap table. How do you even consider the value of equity? What could the upside be? What could the downside be? How much is our total stock option pool? What was the value of the last round? What could be the value of the next round? What is the strike price? What is the upside? And I say this because you have a lot of technical audiences here. And a lot of engineers have lots of choices of where they go. They work for big tech, they go to FANG, or they go to a startup. And I would say if you are considering a startup to bet your career on, make sure the founders and the teams are very transparent with you about kind of the compensation, the equity structure, the upside for you. And the second piece around that is when you are in a company, making sure that you're really understanding the big picture. Like, great, it's nice, you're going in there writing code, but like a lot of focus for us at Endor is we share the dirty laundry with all employees. Like, we'll talk about what's working well. We'll talk a lot about what's not working well. Because I feel like you're in a journey, and everybody knows like a startup journey is not a straight up to the moon. You eventually might get to the moon. There's lots of ups and downs and bumps along the way. And you want these people committed and bought in because they understand that that's what a journey is. And so you treat them as adults in the room. You kind of share a lot of that practical feedback. What's working? Is sales working? Is product working? What's broken? How's the leadership going? What changes are you thinking about? What do you need to make? The kind of evaluation of the company and all of this. I think it really gets people committed and focused into the mission and to work with you on this.
That's good. What's a leadership mistake that you've made early on that you would never repeat?
I'll come back to hiring because I feel like that is an important topic. Most companies, like, you either build a great, incredible product and you win the market, is you need the best engineers and the best product. Oftentimes I've seen people take the easy route, like, hey, I worked for company X. I know 10 people in that company X that are my peers that I'm just going to bring in, and we're going to build a product with all 10 of us that understand. The fallacy in that is all 10 of you think alike. All 10 of you have had the same exact experience. Let's take an example. If all 10 of you worked at Google, you have no idea how the real world outside of the Silicon Valley works with real software engineering problems, the legacy architectures, all of the other ways that people operate. And so, I made that mistake before where I'll just go to the same pool of talent that I know, and it's an easy answer, and we'll go grab 10 people and get to work. And what I found is along the way, you just have a lot of blind spots. As you're building software, building products, shipping software, things are different. So with Endor as an example, when we started, we made a promise to ourselves as founders that no more than 2 engineers in the first 15 would be from the same company. So we actually worked extra hard and kind of found we ended up with 2 from Meta, 2 from Cisco, 2 from Palo Alto Networks, 2 from GitHub, and we kind of 2 from Uber. And we created a very diverse engineering organization, which to this date is probably one of the most critical foundations that we have in this company.
Well, yeah, it makes sense because you're building tools for developer workflows. You need to know all the different types of workflows. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you did make that mistake though at the beginning. You just grabbed a whole group of people and then it didn't work out well.
So, the benefit I have is I've been building startups the last 15 years. Endor's my third. So I wouldn't say I made that mistake at Endor, but I did certainly, earlier in my life. Yeah.
Nice. Now, you've been doing startups for 15 years. How have you mixed that with your personal relationships? Do you have kids?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great topic. So I do have kids. I have twin boys. They're 5. I have an incredibly supportive wife that has been there from the point of time where I had nothing in my life to show. I had no successful startup or exits at the time, all the way through the ups and downs of startup building, getting acquired, having an incredible run to the last startup, having twins born in the middle of the pandemic. And then when they were literally 1 year and 2 months, me telling her that I wanted to quit and start my next startup. And that was a tough subject of discussion. And to this date, I'd say there's still some bitterness of what if. And, look, I'd had an incredible success with the last startup. My wife's perspective was take a break, let's travel, kids are young, this is time to do it. And, my counterpoint was, look, I've stumbled upon this idea that we discussed at the beginning, how I ended up with the Endor idea. I have this idea. The time is now. Ideas, don't wait for you 6 months, 12 months. Somebody's got to solve it. Somebody's got to solve it now. And so that's the story of where we ended up. And look, my goal right now is I am very focused on how I prioritize my time, because I want to make sure I'm, there for bedtime with kids. I want to, as much as possible, drop them off to school in the morning, spend Saturdays kind of mostly undistracted. And so there's just a manic prioritization of how I, spend my time and what I spend my time on.
That is awesome. I've got 3 little ones, 8, 6, and 3. So
amazing. Similar. Yeah. So if you average it out, you're probably the similar boat.
Yeah, not twins though. Whenever I meet people with twins, I'm like, look, I will never say that I understand what that's like, because we did it one at a time and it was hard every time. So 2 at once. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you found this episode useful, please share it with a friend or a colleague who you think would get value from it. And if you have topics that you would like to hear discussed on the podcast, either add me on LinkedIn or send me an email, joel@moderncto.io. Every time I get an email or LinkedIn message, it absolutely makes my day and inspires me to keep going.